So, welcome back to the channel. So, one of the things that I love about Glenn Loury is his very sharp wit, his impeccable diction, and his ability to just condense ideas into very digestible pieces that anyone can understand. And in all of his videos that I've watched, none has impressed me so much as this video and this short clip that I'm about to react to, in which Glenn was just absolutely beautiful in his analysis of the problem, in pointing his finger to exactly what the problem is and where the solution would lie. So let's get into it.
I want to say a couple of things. So one is, I want to talk about Charles Murray a little bit later in our conversation here. I had him on the show. We had a encounter. He has a book out, Facing Reality. Both of us have read the book and so forth.
But we want to do soul first, right?
Yeah, no, I'm not trying to get to Charles Murray right now. I'm trying to make an analogy between the assumption that historical circumstance and oppression and suffering have precluded applying the presumption of free will to the victims of American racism, and the assumption that partially genetically influenced expressions of intellectual ability as measured by test scores preclude African Americans from performing in a college classroom or avoiding some social dysfunction like criminal behavior or something like that. The predeterminism element of these arguments. One argument comes from the left. It says history has dealt blacks a bad hand. We have been oppressed and we have been beaten and we abused. What can you expect but that you would see pathological behavior? It's fixed by the historical inheritance. The wealth gap is what it is because we didn't get the hand down from our parents, because they didn't get the hand down from their parents. What can we do? The crime rate is what it is. The test scores are what they are, etc. Fixed by history, predetermined. And the genetic argument, it's in your genes. What can we expect? Do the best you can. We'll respect you as a human being, but we won't expect you to be doing calculus, and we won't expect you to be performing at a high level. And if we see that you're not a good parent, or that you break the law frequently, or that you're more often involved in violence, while we regret that, we can't say that we're surprised, because after all, you're genetic, et cetera, et cetera. Well, those arguments have something in common with one another. And from a spiritual, not religious point of view, from the point of view of thinking, the human being, unlike the animal king, the rest of the animal kingdom, we have a spirit, we have a will, we have a capacity to make ourselves, we can be self-critical, we can, notwithstanding the givens, which are our historical inheritance, whether it be genes or some kind of socio-political structure, nevertheless will ourselves to be differently in the world than what has been the case. We can be better. And I say that not just for individuals, and this is really the point that the second point I want to make. I say it for communities, the collectivity. We have a collective consciousness, a kind of cultural orientation, which we can influence with our literature, with our politics, with our public life. We can teach our children differently. We can hold up ideals that they can be reflected in our journalism and in our art and in our social life. There's a better and a worse way of living. We can say to the gangbangers who are killing each other on the streets of Chicago like crazy, last weekend was a horrible weekend, we can say to them, be better. We mean that you can live differently than what you're living, and we can hold that up as an ideal. A good black person would not live like this, would not neglect to take care of their children, would make the best out of their opportunities. Sloth is bad. Self-pity is bad. Live a life of dignity. But if you embrace this predeterminism, whether it be a genetic or a cultural, historical predeterminism, you say all the outcomes are already fixed, you make it almost impossible for a community to marshal its moral resources on behalf of teaching its members what it means to live rightly and to live well. It's a demoralization. It's a fundamental demoralization to take these predetermined positions, it seems to me. So,
Glenn, that was too good. That was an aria.
So now Glenn is so right and is so on point that I cannot even begin to analyze or even put into words how brilliantly he just expressed this position. His brilliant critique of the predeterminist attitude or the predeterminist theories for both the right and both from the left. I mean, one, the left says that the reasons why black people are the way they are is because of predetermined historical oppression, and that you cannot expect them to rise above that situation because of the historical oppression. And then on the right, you have the predeterminist genetic theory. The black people are just the way they are because of their genetics, so you cannot expect them to be better. Now, when I see these arguments, I see that they are basically the same arguments, but just probably the flip side of a coin. They are both very reductionist. They are both very simple and very naive arguments. They do not take into consideration so many other variables that may be responsible for why the outcome of black people, African Americans, have been what they are. So Glenn is basically telling us that, look, if you are giving these two kinds of arguments, then basically you've taken away the incentive, you've taken away the will for such a people to rise above their station. If they are going to be like that because of historical oppression, then how can they never be better? Where does free will come into it? If they're going to be like that based on their genetics, then how can you even expect them to be better in the first place? How can they ever rise above that station? So I think he was very spot on in this analysis in saying that both the right and the left, they're wrong in this. Charles Murray is wrong in his supposed conclusion that African Americans are the way they are because of their genetics somehow. And I begin to wonder, does inferior genetics somehow correlate with crime, or does it correlate with poverty or some other things? I don't know, but I don't think that's the case, and I think he's very wrong in that sense. Even though he'll tell you that he doesn't draw any conclusions from the data, but anyone who wants to follow the logical train of thought and what he is saying would ultimately want to come to that conclusion. So both the right, both the left, they're wrong. They're just making the same arguments, but from different positions. And that is why it is very, very important for us to have these kinds of conversation. I mean, the way Glenn just put it and said that, look, both positions are predeterminist positions. And any predeterminist positions, you're going to have a definite outcome from that, a very predictable, definite outcome. But that is not how humans are. Black people, after all, they are human beings, and they can make choices, and their choices are going to affect the outcomes of their life. So even though historical influences affect the outcome of certain things, even though genetics affect the outcome of certain things, those are not the biggest contributing factors to however an individual will turn out. Not to think of a large group of people, not to think of a whole race of people. So both arguments are wrong, and I'm glad that Glenn absolutely put his finger to this, and this is one case in which Glenn was absolutely on fire, in which Glenn was so impressive and he got the meat of the argument. So that's the video. Tell me what you think in the comment section below, whether or not you agree with Glenn Loury or whether you agree with the left that historical oppression is the reason for the outcome of African Americans today, or that their genetics is the reason for the outcome as espoused by the right. Until next time, remain awesome.